Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to another Supatease video. And in this one, we're going to be going over a developer update for Shadowlands directly from Watcher himself. This is probably the most important update as we're already getting so close to the release of Shadowlands in terms of how they're feeling and finalizing certain systems in the game based on the criticisms that they have been receiving throughout the beta. I just wanted to summarize them, go through them, give my opinion of them, and the approach of them in this video. So if that's something that interests you with Shadowlands coming out, this is definitely a video you'll want to check out. The first part, introducing 9.0.2, the TLDR, is that they're just splitting the testing into two different portions so that they can get the leveling experience ironed out while still working on the max level content, which is great. For alt leveling, there has been a lot of feedback raised, even especially by myself, where you level through the content and then you're forced to go through the same story arc, the same campaign areas, and it becomes tedious to kind of progress on those train tracks every single time on alt characters. Basically, that's being alleviated, but there were concerns brought up that you may want to level through the campaign process because it lets you test your covenant abilities out. So if you really wanted to test them, because otherwise you would automatically lock in your covenant at level 50 rather than level 60 on your alt, you may not know what one you actually want to go for without having tested them yourself. So if you want to go through the campaign to test every ability, you're going to be able to do that, which is great if you want that as a choice. But if you don't, you'll be able to just pick your covenant right away and start leveling your character. So it's the best of both worlds. You can still test them out, level them through the campaign if you want, or you know what one you want, you got that, you go, you level the way you want to level. Really great. I'm glad that the feedback towards alts has been listened to, because for myself personally, it was a pretty big problem point for Battle for Azeroth and Legion to an extent. Now, Torghast is a new feature coming to Shadowlands. If you're not aware, it's going to be, you can be single player, but you can do it in a group. And it's going to be like a solo dungeon crawler where you gain power-ups and you build your character uniquely every time you run through the dungeon. It's looking like it could be possibly exciting. Myself personally, I'm just so heavily invested in PvP that I haven't spent a huge amount of time with Torghast. But basically, this post is saying that it's going to be, they're going to reduce the amount of introductory time so you don't feel like you're spending so many runs doing kind of tutorials, which is great. If you're somebody who wants to go in there the first time, you go through one tutorial, you get it done through with, and then you can start doing the event itself. So I'm glad that they tuned that. I feel like the Visions system had this really elongated tutorial phase where you couldn't push it higher because of the research time gating, whereas you were basically completing it on a really easy difficulty that felt like a tutorial for a long time until you hit that cap point. So reducing that is great, especially for the barrier to entry to alts. When you're more comfortable with Torghast and you level a new character, you won't have to spend a huge amount of time just introducing yourself to it. While still maintaining the kind of RP and the quest elements of it itself. Also, Torghast is going to be split into two sections. Hopefully, to my understanding, one of them won't be as time consuming. You'll go through maybe it's like your weekly Torghast, and you'll gain resources towards crafting your legendaries, and we'll also unlock the second portion of Torghast. But I'm hoping that this doesn't end up feeling like Visions in Battle for Azeroth. That's my biggest concern with it, because it's very similar in concept. You go into an instance by yourself, you progress against monsters. So it's just, to me, it's very similar, even if it is kind of unique that you get a different build every time you go through it. You could think of that as almost like looting the potions as well from Visions and getting different effects on your abilities. Although those maybe didn't change every time, it was still powering your character up to function differently in the Visions, or gaining those specific damage buffs as well from killing rare monsters in the Vision. It has a lot of similarities in terms of its overall gameplay to myself. It's much deeper, obviously. I'm not trying to, mock the integrity of it. It is definitely a lot deeper of an experience, but for my own personal gameplay, I'm just not a big fan of that. I love challenge modes where you jump in and you really push yourself to the limit to try and overcome adversity and you get this unique exclusive reward. I love those. But when it becomes repetitive and I feel like I'm not learning anymore, and it just to get a little bit of a power up so that I can perform in the content I want to do, it becomes a problem. Hopefully here with this means that Torghast won't be as repetitive. You can just get that farming portion done with, and then if you choose to, you could go into the Twisting Corridors, which is considered the challenge mode wing of Torghast, offering 18 floor runs at a higher level of difficulty than the rest of Torghast with cosmetic rewards for clearing certain thresholds. That would be the best of both worlds. You know, you get a little bit dabble and taste of Torghast. You can get it over with if you're not really interested in it. But if you do end up really liking it and you want to push the limits of it, you can get cool cosmetic effects and really challenge yourself in it. Or just do both. You get a little power up for your character and do both. So I am happy that it's being split like this. And I do hope that that ends up being the end result where your weekly maintenance, right, of doing the Torghast for your legendary materials isn't really tedious or repetitive like the Visions. But if I feel like it, I can jump into the Twisting Corridors and really put myself to the test. That's how I'm hoping this plays out. It looks like that's the way that they would want it to play out. So we'll have to wait and see, obviously, but this is a good sign. We have Covenants. This is probably the most hot topic subject here. And I'll have this linked in the description down below if you want to check out the post and actually read through it yourself, because I'm more or less summarizing it. But basically throughout this Covenant portion, which is like, this is like the beefy part of this post, is that they want the Covenants to feel character defining. And the best way I can describe this is almost like a secondary race choice. So you'll feel a very character defining choice when you pick a dwarf paladin versus a Draenei paladin, right? One is a space goat and then one is a dwarf. They're dramatically different in that character defining aspect when you zone into the game, right? Your character feels like I'm part of the Draenei or I'm part of the dwarves. And I like that feeling, right? I feel like we can all agree that we like that feeling. The main thing is that the racial choice does have an impact, and you can't get me wrong there. It does have an impact, but it's not, maybe in some situations it is game breaking, right? Like you have Night Elves in Mythic Plus that in MDI have seen the ability to skip certain parts of the dungeon that if the entire group wasn't all Night Elves, they wouldn't be able to skip. There's possibilities of that with Venthyrs, Door of Shadows, to jump over certain aspects of dungeons potentially, where to do that dungeon the fastest, you need 5 Venthyr classes. I don't know if that's seen as a problem or not, or if that's just the way it is, the way that they would want it to be. But it seems they do want it to be a character-defining choice, much like a racial would be. My criticisms and feedback to that is that the racial choice is, you can see it. You know, I know when someone's a dwarf paladin, because when they sign up for my group, it says dwarf paladin. When they're in my party, I can see their character frame. The problem with the Covenants is that it's all optional. When I pick a Necrolord Covenant, there's no permanent change to my character visually. I don't have spikes or something extra coming out of my character. The transmog is optional. And the main problem with this is that how are you supposed to know what type of shaman you're inviting to your group? You may want a Venthyr shaman, right, for your arena team. But you won't know. They could lie to you and say they're not Venthyr because it's not directly shown anywhere. There's no way to inspect it. Like when I inspect a character, I can see the talent someone is playing and recommend different talents. When I inspect a player, I can't see their Covenant choice. I can't see their Soulbind conduits. I can't see any of the decisions that they're making. I don't know what I'm inviting to my group, which is kind of a problem, at least in my mind. But it seems like they do want it to be a permanent choice. Well, not permanent, sorry. They want it to be a character-defining choice, but not a permanent one. So there are catch-up mechanics, so that if you're not doing the weekly quests as it's seen, you'll catch up doing dungeons and PvP and other activities. Or if you want to switch to a different Covenant, you'll catch up by doing these activities. You're not going to just be forced to do only the content restricted to the Covenant when you want to level it up, which is really nice. I hope that's how it plays out, where you can do whatever content you want and it works towards your renown with that Covenant. And then optionally, then you can make the choice. Like maybe this week I want to mix up, do some dungeons, do some quests and some PvP, get my renown progression. Or maybe this week I only feel like doing PvP, but I'm still progressing my renown. Or maybe I only want to do dungeons and that's progressing my renown. I would love it if it's optional. Well, the content that you want to do all benefits to the cap, and then you hit the cap, and then you're playing the game for fun at that point. That's what I would love. That's the way I would love to vision it. And I'm hoping that's how it's delivered. It does seem like it's at least guaranteed as a catch-up mechanic that you'll be able to do a wide variety of content to catch up the downsides, and that's mostly attributed to if you picked a Covenant at the start of Shadowlands and then ended up not wanting it, right? Let's say it got nerfed or it's underperforming or you just felt like you made a wrong choice and you wanted to switch it, you can switch it, catch it up doing the content that you want. But if you want to go back to that Covenant after leaving it, it's going to basically take you 2 weeks. It's like a 2-week time sink where you wait and do a couple of just sort of ceremonial activities to go back to it, right? The main thing is that the covenants are not going to function like talents. They're not going to function like PP talents. You're not going to be able to change them on the content, right? It's a permanent choice. Like if you picked a dwarf, then you're going to have to make the fact that you're a dwarf work in all of that type of content. I myself, I'm not sure if you need a second character defining trait like that, like a racial, whether or not that's necessary. And to me, again, I already raised the feedback of does it feel as noticeable and character defining as picking a race, because most of the stuff is optional to see. I can't turn off dwarf, I can't transmog myself to a Draenei, whereas the Necrolord aesthetic appeal, I can somewhat hide until I press my ability. It's just really it's hidden. So if it's that permanent choice and you're committed to that that defining factor for your character, I feel like it should be more visually apparent, and I shouldn't have to guess what covenant a player is until they've pressed what their spell is. It should say, like, at least when you're targeting a player, it should say Venthyr Dwarf Shaman, for example, when I'm targeting them. So I know, like, okay, that's what covenant they are, whether or not that's for when I'm inviting them to a group or I'm doing battle with them in the world. I feel like it needs to be more clear, and there should be ways to inspect other players' soulbinds and conduits and stuff and sort of give feedback on that. One interesting portion here was the use of the word loadout, which I've used in my criticisms of the game. So generally speaking, I think that there are 3 loadouts in WoW. You have defense, and then utility is baked into defense. You have single target, you have AoE. You could split AoE into whether or not there's 2 targets, 3 targets, 4 targets, 5 targets. AoE, you're hitting more than one. And when you're making these choices on your talents, depending on what the boss demands, the boss may demand that you need more survivability. So you pick the survivability talent. The boss may demand that it's only single target because it's the only thing you can hit. Or the boss may demand that it's AoE because it's got 15 things you need to hit, right? So when you go into that boss and you've picked the defense option when it wasn't necessary, you made the wrong loadout choice, right? In that circumstance, you made the wrong loadout choice. Now, players who care about getting the maximum value of their characters are going to know the correct loadout choice for all those situations to min-max themselves to the highest performance. The fact that all of that decision-making was labeled as a decision matrix, that's a big set of words. It's a decision matrix? Have you seen the Matrix with Neo? How is the average player supposed to calculate that? When I'm thinking about it, right? I'm just somebody who plays at the highest level, and I love to just kind of nerd out and go deep into this stuff, but it's being referred to as a matrix. I feel like that's a problem if it's literally being referred to as a matrix. In my mind, I would take the talent rows and turn them into actual loadouts so that you know which one is the best single target one, you know which one is the best AoE one, without having to go to a third-party website or do an insane amount of math to decide what the matrix is the best choice in those situations. I would break the talent rows down into one section where if you pick the left talent row, you get everything on the left talent row. This is the newbie talent row, the beginner, the training wheel talent row. It's mostly passives, if not all passives. That just increase the damage of your spells, help you perform even if you're performing incorrectly, to get you into the content. And it's not going to be the most competitive option. You're not going to be getting raid world first with it. It's just there for players who maybe you're bringing them in for the first time and they really want to go with you. They're going to perform at least 30% worse than the other options when I get to them. And it has to be at least 30%. Or otherwise everybody just plays the training wheel spec, because why are you going to complicate things, right? You can just get the performance without all of the stress of learning new stuff. It has to be at least 30% worse. But at least like they can get in there. They can start functioning. Maybe it's good in a wide variety. It's got like half single target, half AoE. And and they're going to be somewhat functional. So you can bring that player in who doesn't really have a lot of time to practice or that, and they'll get through it, right? It's the newbie one. Then when they get fully developed or bored of the newbie one, if they don't and they don't care about progressing into higher difficulty content, they stay with it. That's fine. But then the second one is your single target loadout. It's going to be the highest single target damage you can do possibly with the talents that are in the build. And they're automatically selected into the center row. And it has more on-use effects that will then result in you doing more damage than the newbie loadout. Then you have the right talent row, which would be AoE. All of the best AoE options are in the right talent row. When you lock it in, that's what you're choosing your character to be doing, is the maximum potential area of effect damage. Now, in my mind, this already exists in the game, but you have to go look up in a secondary resource which ones were passives for the newbie talent, which ones were the best AoE one, which ones were the best single target one, and then it's just mismatched everywhere, and it's Neo, and I'm in the Matrix. Why does it need to be like that? They're both exactly the same, except one is disorganized and one is organized. There's no you can't say that this is unique and special when that's all everybody's doing. They're building the loadout, but it's a matrix to figure out what the loadout is, versus the other option where it's just, yep, you're making the right decision in those environments. It's not because you checked the right box over the left box. It just seems like it could be made a lot more organized, and that the fact that it was referred to as a decision matrix makes me think that even more. But yeah, so and I can see this, like, wanting it to be a character defining factor. They want you to be referred to as a Kyrian paladin, the same way you'd be a dwarf paladin. My point of feedback would be then put in the game when someone selects a covenant, it says dwarf Kyrian paladin when you target them and look at them, so you know, because it's hidden. It's not like, well, the dwarf one is actually labeled there too when you target them, but you can tell when someone's a certain race. But it's also there. That would be my point of feedback, as once a person picks a covenant, it should say Kyrian race class. They seem to be really willing to make sure that the covenants are balanced, so that if you pick a covenant, it's not awful in one part of the game, right? So, or too good in all parts of the game, so the other ones aren't options. They do want to balance it so that they're all somewhat competitive. The main problem with that is then they lose their identity. Again, back to the original discussion of like what types of spells are in the game. You have defense, utility, single target, AoE. So if you have a covenant that's built around AoE, it's going to dominate AoE situations. The only way to not make it dominate AoE situations is to blur the lines and to make the other options that are normally single target function more like an AoE spell, but not to the 100% value of the one that's supposed to be the AoE spell. So that by picking the AoE spell, that's your character defining role. You're 10% better in AoE, and then this other person is 10% better in single target, but 10% worse in AoE. That's where your character defining choice is going to come into play. Hopefully the tuning gets it to at least a 10% difference. But my main point of feedback is it blurs the line of the identity. Which one is the AoE one if they both AoE? Which one is the best single target one if they both function as single target one? Because a lot of the alleviations of that are coming from the conduits. If you pick an AoE covenant ability, the conduit will increase its single target potential. So it's blurring the line. It then just becomes it's a damage spell that hits everything and heals everything. And it doesn't have its identity or its character defining factor. It's just a blah, and then you're picking whichever blah is the best blah. If you were going to balance it the way that they're wanting to balance it here, that's in my mind what would happen to the spell, right? If you have chain lightning and lightning bolt, to be able to make them equivalent, you would have to make lightning bolt into chain lightning, right? But still do the same damage as lightning bolt to one target. And now they're no longer separate identities. That's how you balance them, right? So I'm a bit worried that this will just kind of blur where you should be enjoying the benefits of your covenant. But then if they don't do it, then you've got the problem of being incredibly disadvantaged, right? This whole covenant thing, I'm interested to see how it plays out. If I was a world first raider, I would be really upset about it. I'm not. because those Workforce Raiders are going to be leveling up like 4 of a class, I would imagine, if not like 4 of 2 different classes, and maybe even multiples of that if there's any sort of loot funneling stuff. I'm not sure how the loot system's working at the moment, so maybe I'm not going to comment on that too much. But for myself personally, start of expansion's always kind of just crazy. You see what happens, you go with your gut maybe on what you want to do that's the best performing, it looks the most interesting and fun, and you go along with it, and there's going to be nerfs and tuning happening all the time. And you just kind of going through it, right? That's how most expansions are. So I'm not super anxious about it myself personally at the start of this, but I see where the problems are going to come, and I just wanted to give my initial feedbacks in terms of I think it should be more visually apparent what choice you're making, like say Kyrian when you're targeting a player, along with their race and their class. And then hopefully this tuning thing makes it so they're competitive in environments, but hopefully it also doesn't blur the line of the identity of the spell itself. PvP itemization. Oh my goodness. I was worried that this was just going to fly under the radar, where the PvP vendor, if you haven't seen that video, was just somewhat going to be ignored. But they've heard it. They're talking about it. They're acknowledging it. And they agree that the current PvP vendors fall short of that goal. So the solutions that they're listing here, they're going to rework stat coverage. So this means likely increasing versatility on more pieces from the vendor, which would be great. That means you'd use more pieces of it in PvP from those from that source. Or providing PvP specific bonuses through those items. In my mind, the best solution would be to, and this is to make PvEers not feel like they have to PvP, but make the PvP gear still the better choice in PvP. So you take the helmet, the shoulders, the chest, the gloves, and the legs, right? You create a 2 set and a 4 set, or maybe a 5 set, a 2 set and a 5 set. Those items don't have great stats. Maybe they all have versatility, but they don't have your best secondary. But the bonuses on wearing them is something like this is the same for all classes. Your 2 pieces increases damage to all enemy players by X%, increases all healing to enemy players by X%, right? This way they could actually tune the classes too a little bit better for PvP. So if you have a spec like Outlaw Rogue that isn't doing enough damage to players, when they wear their 5 set bonus, they do, this is a random number, 50% more damage to players, right? Than the other classes who have 30% more damage to players. They could utilize that set bonus to make the PvP gear the best in PvP, and it's acquired from PvP, and tune the specs so that they feel fun and enjoyable in PvP without breaking PvE. I don't see it as confusing because it's listed as a set bonus. You're doing more damage to players. How is that confusing? If you wear these 2 pieces together, you do more damage to players. That's your benefit. I personally would like to see that as the solution, because I've been thinking about this when I made the PvP vendor video on like what should the solution be. I would like that. A 5 set bonus on the main pieces. They don't necessarily have the correct optimized gear, but at least a little bit of versatility. And then their set bonuses is increases damage to players, or maybe reduces damage taken from players depending on if that spec is too flimsy, like Enhancement Shaman. Like Enhancement Shaman takes 20% less damage from players. And then they can balance it. Then PvP, all the specs are more fun. In PvP, you wear gear that's awarded from PvP, and PvEers don't feel like they have to get it. That's my solution. All right, sockets. While we eliminated Warforging and Titan Forging with the goal of increasing clarity and player agency over rewards, the question of how to handle sockets was not quite as clear cut. A certain critical mass of sockets across all player gear is essential to support jewel crafting as a player profession, and in recent expansions, the chance of any in-game item to upgrade to a socketed version gave players of all playstyles the opportunity to interact with the jewel crafting trade skill. At the same time, sockets unquestionably constitute power and can be every bit as impactful as Warforging. Trying to balance these considerations, the approach we've settled in Shadowlands is to keep sockets as a random item property, but allow players to add sockets to their items via consumables sold by Venari in the Maw, similar to the gouged eyes. This way, all players can take advantage of gems, and seeing a socketed item drop offers a short-term efficiency advantage, but in the long run, competitive players can still make steady progress towards a best-in-slot gear setup without relying on additional layers of randomness. Finally, in order to limit the total impact of gems, the power gap between players with full sockets and those without in Shadowlands, only helms, rings, necks, bracers, and belts can have a socket randomly generated or added by Venari. These changes should all be active by next week's beta update. I'm a bit worried about the catch-up mechanics. So they're limiting the sockets to only helmets, rings, necks, bracers, and belts. I'm a bit worried. What is the time frame on getting these and unlocking them and using them? Are you? Is it gonna? Because there's no catch-up mechanic on unlocking those gouged eyes from visions. Where is the currency coming from to get these sockets? If the currency to get these sockets is coming from all content, you complete a dungeon, you hit a cap of a currency to get a socket for the week from doing your dungeons, or you do PvP and you hit a cap of the currency to get your sockets, or you do the raid and you hit your currency cap to get the sockets and you socket your gear. Great. Make it optional, like the renown is for the covenants. So I can pick what I want to do, or I can do a mix of all of it if I want to do it. And then I'm not forced to do it. That's the main thing. I don't want to be forced to do it. So I'm a bit worried about this. Especially if you're worried about PvP where your stats for min-max, they matter a lot. So I'm not sure if there's going to be a catch-up mechanic for this. I'm not really a big as I just really hope that the currency you get comes from all content. That's what I would like personally. That would be my feedback here for sockets. Sure, at random someone gets one a little bit faster than somebody else, but you can get it from all content in the game, the currency, and probably cap it. It should be capped. So you don't feel like you need to get all of your sockets on the first day and spend 20 hours doing it. And then maybe even a catch up, right? Like you can earn 1,000, maybe then by the end of it, it'd be too much. I'm not sure. This is a little bit of concern, but it's definitely maybe on the bottom end. I'm sure this is going to be something people complain about at some point, but the other things are much more substantial. Myself personally, after reading through this, I am thankful that they're listening to the feedback. I feel like this is the most receptive they've been to feedback in a beta at such a large scale than any other expansion. They have made changes that the player community has requested, like making conduit banks, so your conduits can just be interchanged like that. You can change covenants, you can change the soul binds, but there are limitations on it to try and discourage you from spam doing it, so it doesn't fit into the decision making matrix, which again, the fact that it's called a decision making matrix, I feel like should be organized a little bit better. But aside from that, I'm still excited for Shadowlands. I'm curious to see what they're going to do with the PvP vendors specifically. And I'm kind of excited to get going, but I'm going to still be making videos about Shadowlands here on the channel. If you're interested in checking out tier lists for ranking covenant abilities, ranking classes, specs, how they're functioning in all aspects of the game, or if you're interested in how they're functioning in like what would be the best covenant choice for all content, what's the best covenant for PvP, PvE, that type of information. This channel is intended to be a resource for those of you that are interested in that information. So I would appreciate it if you subscribe to the channel. If you liked the video, please like the video. Leave a comment down below if you've got ideas or thoughts on what I've gone over here. And yeah, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and we'll see you in the next one.